Shen didn't tell me directly that I wasn't invited. He let me find out the way people do when they want humiliation to feel natural, like it's just the world arranging itself against you. And I found out through Zoe's hesitant voice on the phone while I was standing in front of my bedroom mirror fixing my hair, wearing a simple black dress I'd chosen because it was elegant without trying, because deep down I still believed family milestones were something you showed up for even when you weren't celebrated. And Zoe said, "Lily? Please don't go tonight," and my hand paused mid-button, the silence stretching long enough for dread to bloom. "Why wouldn't I go?" I asked softly, already hearing the answer in the way she breathed, and Zoe swallowed. "Shen told your parents he doesn't want you there," and the words landed like cold water, not because Shen had ever been kind, but because exclusion always stings differently when it comes wrapped in ceremony. And I stared at my reflection, seeing my own face tighten as if my skin could brace itself. "He doesn't want me at his promotion party," I repeated, and Zoe's voice cracked with anger she couldn't fully show. "He called you a distraction. He said you'd make it awkward." Awkward, the word people use when they mean unwanted, and I felt my chest hollow for a moment, then fill with something heavier, because Shen's promotion party wasn't just a celebration, it was a showcase, the kind of corporate night where connections are toasted and deals are hinted at under chandelier light, and Shen had been desperate for it, bragging for weeks about his new title, about how he was finally being taken seriously, about how this was the moment the family would stop looking at him like a boy playing business and start looking at him like a man with power. And power was all Shen ever chased, even as a child, even when we were young and he would shove past me to speak first at the dinner table, to answer questions meant for me, to claim space like oxygen belonged to him. And now he was still doing it, just with suits and contracts instead of toys, and Zoe added quietly, "Your parents agreed," and that was the part that made my throat tighten, because Shen's cruelty was predictable, but my parents' silence was consent, and I asked, "What exactly did he say?" And Zoe hesitated, then whispered, "He begged them not to let you come. He said this is his night and you always steal focus, as if my existence was theft," and I laughed once, sharp and unbelieving. "I haven't said a word to him in months," and Zoe's voice softened. "It's not about what you do, Lily, it's about what you represent," and I knew she was right, because Shen didn't hate me for any real offense. He hated me because I was the quiet constant he couldn't outperform, because while he chased titles, I built foundations, while he performed success, I made decisions that actually moved money, and the ugliest truth was that Shen's company didn't stand on his shoulders alone, it stood on agreements that existed because my name opened doors, and he never acknowledged that, he just took it like inheritance, like entitlement, like air, and I closed my eyes slowly, breathing through the sting, then asked, "Did he say anything else?" And Zoe's voice dropped. "He said if you show up, he'll make sure everyone knows you weren't supposed to be there," and humiliation flashed in my mind like a camera bulb, people turning, whispers, Shen smiling politely while cutting me down in public, and something inside me, something that had been trained for years to endure, finally grew tired of endurance, and I whispered, "Understood," and Zoe exhaled, "Lily, I'm sorry," and I said, "Don't be," because clarity is a strange kind of peace, and after I hung up, I stood very still in my room, the black dress half-buttoned, the invitation sitting unopened on my dresser because it had been addressed to my parents, not to me, as if I were a footnote in my own family, and outside the window the evening sky was bruising into night, and I realized that Shen wanted me absent not because I didn't matter, but because I mattered too much to his illusion, and I could have gone anyway, could have forced my presence into his celebration, could have let him publicly reject me just to prove I couldn't be erased, but that would have been his stage, his narrative, his control, and Elaine. No, I wasn't using other names. I didn't need a lawyer's name to hear the lesson life had already taught me. The loudest revenge is never loud in the moment, it is quiet in the aftermath, and I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder of active contracts tied to Shen's company, contracts he had been bragging about securing, contracts that were not secured by his brilliance but by the relationships I had cultivated over years, agreements that included clauses he had never bothered to read because he thought signatures were magic and not responsibility, and my cursor hovered over the list, vendor partnerships, licensing approvals, distribution commitments, each one a thread holding Shen's promotion together, because the truth was, tonight's party wasn't just a party, it was an announcement to investors, a signal that Shen's company was stable, worthy, rising, and stability is fragile when built on borrowed credibility, and I remembered something Shen once said to me during an argument, his voice smug, "You don't own anything, Lily, you just happen to be in the room," and I had stayed silent then, but now the room was mine, because my name was on the controlling side of these agreements, my signature the quiet anchor. And I didn't need to shout, I didn't need to beg my parents for a seat at a table that didn't respect me. I needed only one phone call, and my fingers moved calmly as I dialed Zoe, because Zoe wasn't just a friend, she was my assistant in the world. Shen pretended he understood, and she answered instantly, Lily, and I said softly, Zoe, cancel every contract Shen's company signed this week, invoke the compliance clauses, make it clean, and Zoe went silent for half a second, then her voice sharpened with understanding, are you sure? And I looked at my reflection again, at the woman who had been told not to come, not to exist too loudly, and I replied, he wanted me gone from his party, I said, so he can experience what gone actually means, and Zoe whispered, I'll do it, and when the call ended, I sat back in the quiet of my room, the dress still unbuttoned, the night unfolding without me, and somewhere across town Shen was raising a glass, believing he had erased me from his celebration, unaware that while he toasted his promotion, the foundation beneath it was already dissolving, contract by contract, signature by signature, and by morning, Shen would learn that exclusion is a dangerous game when the person you exclude is the one holding the ink. I didn't go to the party, I didn't stand outside the venue like a ghost begging to be seen. I stayed home in the same quiet room where Shen believed I belonged, because people like him always confuse silence with weakness, and the truth is silence is where decisions are made, and while music began swelling across town and glasses clinked under soft gold lights, Zoe was moving through the world Shen thought he controlled with a precision that felt almost unreal, because contracts don't care about titles, they care about clauses, and Shen's company was built on clauses he never read, and at 8:42 p.m. Zoe sent me the first message, distribution partner notified. Pending suspension, and I stared at the screen, calm, because this wasn't sabotage, it was accountability. These agreements were conditional, contingent on ethical compliance and leadership disclosures, and Shen's promotion night was exactly the kind of public announcement that triggered review requirements, and he had been careless enough to sign without understanding that my involvement wasn't decoration, it was structure, and at 9:06 p.m. Zoe texted again, licensing approval withdrawn. Legal cited misrepresentation risk, and my pulse remained steady, because misrepresentation was exactly what Shen was doing, presenting himself as the sole architect of deals that depended on my signature and my reputation, and at 9:23 p.m. another message, vendor contract paused. Emergency clause invoked, and I exhaled slowly, imagining Shen's smile widening in front of cameras, his speech about leadership and gratitude, his parents nodding proudly beside him, unaware that behind the velvet curtain of celebration, the machinery of business was already reversing, and I wondered briefly if my mother would look at me differently tomorrow, if she would finally understand that choosing Shen over me was not neutral, it was alignment, but families like mine rarely understand until consequences speak louder than feelings, and consequences were speaking now in emails and compliance flags and quiet legal language, and at 10:15 p.m. Zoe called, her voice low, Lily, it's happening fast, and I sat up slightly, how fast, and Zoe hesitated, they're panicking. Shen's CFO just emailed asking for clarification, they didn't realize the agreements were conditional on your continued partnership, and the word conditional tasted almost ironic, because my place in the family had always been conditional, love offered as long as I didn't disrupt Shen's comfort, and now Shen's success was conditional on the very person he wanted erased, and I asked, did you respond? And Zoe's tone turned crisp, I responded with the exact clause. Material change and stakeholder alignment triggers immediate reassessment, and I nodded slowly, because this wasn't personal in writing, it was professional, clean, unshakable, and Shen couldn't argue with a clause the way he argued with my feelings, and then Zoe added softly, Lily, he's calling, and as if summoned, my phone buzzed with Shen's name, and my stomach tightened not with fear but with inevitability, because the first call after exclusion is always indignation, the second is panic, and I answered on the third ring, keeping my voice calm, hello, and Shen's voice exploded through the line, loud music muffled behind him, what the hell did you do? And I leaned back in my chair, I stayed home, I said softly, and he snapped, don't play games, contracts are collapsing, people are asking questions, and I let silence stretch just long enough to make him hear his own desperation, then asked quietly, is your party going well? And he inhaled sharply, you did this because I didn't invite you? And his attempt to reduce it to petty revenge was predictable, because Shen needed me to be emotional to justify his cruelty, and I replied evenly, you excluded me publicly, Shen. I simply corrected the business reality privately, and he hissed, you can't cancel those deals, and I smiled faintly, Zoe already did, and his breath caught, Zoe? He snapped, and I said calmly, yes, Zoe, my assistant, the one you've been emailing for months thinking she was just administrative, and the humiliation in that realization was sharper than any insult, because Shen had dismissed the infrastructure that held him up, and he spat, this is insane, Lily, you're sabotaging family, and I responded softly, Family sabotaged me first, and the music behind him suddenly dulled, as if he had stepped away from the crowd, and his voice dropped into something colder, fix it tonight, and I asked, or what, and there was a pause, then he said the thing he always said when control slipped, Mom and Dad will never forgive you, and I exhaled, they already chose you, and my calm made him angrier, because calm is the one thing manipulators cannot manipulate, and he muttered, you think you're powerful, and I replied, I think contracts are powerful, and he went silent, then whispered sharply, come here. Right now. We'll talk, and I could hear the desperation now, because the party was still happening, but his foundation was shaking, and he needed me back in the room to patch the illusion, and I said quietly, you didn't want me in the room tonight, and Shen's voice cracked, that was different, and I asked, different how, and he swallowed hard, people are asking why you aren't here, and there it was, the truth, my absence was louder than my presence, it was raising questions he couldn't answer, because if Lily wasn't celebrating Shen, what did Lily know, and I replied softly, tell them the truth, and he snapped, the truth is you're jealous, and I laughed once, no, Shen, the truth is you thought you could erase me without losing what I built, and he went quiet again, then hissed, if you don't fix this, I will make sure you regret it, and the threat was almost pathetic now, a child pounding a table after the adults have left, and I said calmly, you already tried that by excluding me, and then I ended the call, because I didn't need to hear him unravel further, and my phone buzzed immediately with another incoming call, my mother, and I answered because some part of me still wanted her to choose truth over comfort, and her voice came out strained, Lily, what is happening? And I could hear party noise behind her too, voices trying to stay cheerful while panic spread underneath, and I replied quietly, Shen didn't want me here, remember, and my mother whispered, this is not the time, and I said, it was the time when he humiliated me, and she inhaled sharply, he was stressed, the family's favorite excuse, and I asked, and I was what, disposable, and my mother's voice broke, he didn't mean it like that, and I replied softly, he meant it exactly like that, and behind her, I heard Shen's voice shouting my name, and my mother whispered urgently, please, just come, fix this. People are watching, and I closed my eyes, because that was the core of it, not love, not remorse, just optics, and I said quietly, let them watch, and then I hung up, and for the first time in my life, the silence after hanging up felt like freedom, and at 11:48 p.m. Zoe sent one final message, all pending contracts paused. Compliance review triggered, Shen's signature authority temporarily suspended, and I stared at the words, because suspension is what happens when people realize the person they promoted doesn't actually hold the power they claimed, and somewhere across town, Shen was standing under chandeliers with a microphone and a smile that was cracking, realizing that exclusion has consequences when you exclude the wrong person, and as midnight approached, I didn't feel triumph, I felt inevitability, because all I had done was stop holding up a structure that was never grateful for my support, and by morning, Shen wouldn't just be missing contracts, he would be missing the illusion that he could control the narrative without me. Shen's promotion party ended the way all false celebrations end, not with laughter, but with whispers, because the moment investors stop smiling and start checking their phones, the room changes, the air tightens, and the person at the center realizes the applause was always conditional, and I was sitting in my quiet living room when the first knock came, sharp and impatient, as if volume could rewrite what had already been signed, and I didn't need to look through the peephole to know it was him, because Shen only knocked like that when he believed a door existed to be opened for him, and the second knock followed immediately, harder, and then his voice, strained and furious, Lily, open up, and I stayed seated for a moment, letting him feel the silence he had tried to assign to me. Then I stood and walked to the door slowly, not trembling, not rushing, because control is often nothing more than who moves first, and when I opened it, Shen was there in his suit, tie loosened, eyes bright with panic he was trying to disguise as anger, the city lights behind him making his face look harsher, smaller, and he didn't waste time pretending, fix this, he said, and the simplicity of the demand was almost laughable, fix this. Like the world rearranged itself around Shen's needs, and I tilted my head, fix what, and his jaw clenched. You know exactly what, he snapped, my contracts are frozen, my partners are calling, the board is asking questions, and I let the words hang. Because every question they asked him was a question he deserved, and I replied softly, you wanted me gone from your night, and Shen's eyes flashed, that was family, he hissed, this is business, and I smiled faintly, it's all the same when you use people, and his hands curled, stop talking like you're some martyr, you did this to humiliate me, and I leaned against the doorframe calmly, no, Shen, you humiliated yourself when you decided I didn't belong in the room, and for a moment his face tightened in a way that revealed fear underneath, because he was realizing this wasn't a tantrum, it was a structural shift, and he lowered his voice, trying a different tone, the one that always came after threats failed. Lily. Please, and the please sounded foreign in his mouth, just come to the office tomorrow, sign a statement, tell them it was a misunderstanding, and I asked quietly, tell them what was a misunderstanding, and he swallowed, that you're still backing us, and there it was, the truth, not an apology, not remorse, just the need for my presence to keep his illusion alive, and I said softly, you didn't want my presence last night, and Shen's voice cracked, I didn't think it would matter, and I stared at him, because that sentence was the entire betrayal. He didn't think I mattered until the world reminded him I did, and before he could speak again, another car pulled up behind him, and Zoe stepped out, calm and composed, holding a slim folder in her hands, and Shen's head snapped toward her like she was evidence come alive. Zoe, he spat, what did you do? And Zoe didn't flinch, she walked up beside me, her voice crisp, I did what the contracts required, and Shen's eyes widened, you work for her, he said like it was an insult, and Zoe replied, I work for integrity, and Shen laughed bitterly, integrity, he repeated, this is revenge, and Zoe opened the folder, sliding out a page, this is compliance, she corrected, your promotion announcement triggered stakeholder disclosure review. Lily's removal from the partnership required notification. You never filed it, and Shen's face went pale, because the board didn't freeze contracts because Lily was petty, they froze them because Shen was negligent, and Zoe continued, calm as a scalpel, you presented yourself as sole controlling officer on deals that list Lily as principal guarantor. That's misrepresentation, and Shen's mouth opened, closed, then he turned back to me, voice shaking now, you're doing this because I didn't invite you, and I exhaled slowly, I'm doing this because you thought you could erase me and still profit from me, and the street was suddenly too quiet, because Shen had no argument left that didn't reveal him, and he stepped closer, desperation sharpening, Mom and Dad are losing it, they're calling everyone, they're saying you've gone crazy, and I smiled faintly, of course they are, because when control breaks, they call it madness. And then Shen said the only honest thing he'd said all night, if I lose this role, I lose everything, and I looked at him, at the boy who grew into a man believing success was something you took, not something you built honestly, and I replied softly, then you should have built it, and his face twisted, you think you're better than me, he whispered, and I shook my head, no, Shen, I think I'm done holding you up, and silence followed, thick and final, and Zoe stepped forward slightly. The board meeting is at 9, she said, they will ask why Lily wasn't listed in the announcement. They will ask why contracts were signed without full disclosure. They will ask why stakeholder clauses were ignored, and Shen's shoulders sagged, because he could already hear the questions that would strip him of his title, and he looked at me one last time, voice raw, please, and for a moment, I saw the child version of him, the one who wanted approval, but then I remembered the adult version, the one who chose humiliation over respect, and I answered softly, you made your choice when you decided I was not welcome, and Shen's eyes burned. Then he turned away abruptly, walking down the steps like a man leaving a stage after the lights go out, and as he reached the sidewalk, his phone rang, and I watched his posture stiffen as he answered, listened, then went still, because some news landed heavier than any insult, and he whispered, barely audible, the contracts, they're gone, and his voice cracked, the board is suspending me? And the street held its breath, and Shen's promotion, his night, his smirk, all collapsed into that one stunned silence, because hours earlier he had begged my parents not to let his unwanted sister come to his party, and now he was the one being removed, not from a party, but from power, and Zoe looked at me quietly, it's done, she murmured, and I nodded, not triumphant, just finished, because revenge was never about destroying Shen, it was about ending the illusion that he could exclude me and still stand on what I built. And as the night air cooled and the city lights blinked indifferent overhead, I understood that the most expensive mistake Shen made wasn't banning me from his celebration, it was believing my absence would be empty, when in truth, my absence was the collapse of everything he never earned.